thank you for being available to talk a bit about our markets, the markets we participate in, and in specifically just getting started. Can you tell us a bit about where Vale's products end up? So what industries we would see Vale's various products play a role?
Sure. So about 65% of our products today service very traditional end uses. We're talking about refined nickel markets like petrochemical, automotive, aerospace, appliances, oil and gas components, and electronics. So products are being used to make alloys that go into other metals, plating bumpers on cars, automotive engine components and things like that. And these products generally are supplied from our refineries in Canada and the UK. Then about 30% of our product also goes into stainless steel, which is a very traditional market for nickel. For us, it's predominantly our ferronickel and some small volumes of our class 1 nickel. Ferronickel volumes are sourced out of Brazil and some minor volumes and other products from Japan and the UK and Canada. And then only a small portion of our volumes today go into batteries for electric vehicles and other energy storage solutions. But that's certainly an exciting end use and a growing one. So people get very excited about that. Vale's product portfolio is also different from the overall market in that our focus has been on these traditional markets, right? Very traditional customers, long-standing relationships. So like I said, about 65, almost 70% of our nickel demand goes there. Where in the market in total, 70% of the total market is made up of stainless steel demand for nickel. So we're exactly opposite of the overall market. But because of that, we do have a lot of important and really long-standing customers that we've had for a long time, built throughout the years in these class 1 markets, and we're developing new relationships every day with EV customers in the electric vehicle market. For copper, it's slightly different since we produce copper concentrates rather than a finished metal. So the copper concentrates fed into smelters and refineries. Those produce finished copper products. So it's really difficult to know exactly where our products go on the copper side, but finished copper goes into construction materials, utilities, renewables, machinery, and end uses like that.
Great, thanks. And you mentioned earlier, lots of interest in the EV market, which we know internally and externally, it's quite a timely question that we get. Can you speak generally to what this means for Vale base metals?
Yeah. So there's definitely no question that the growth of EV has created a lot of excitement and attention for nickel and other battery metals like cobalt and lithium. For Vale, this really means that we have to build new relationships. So it's a new end use. We haven't really sold into that space in a great deal in the past. We also have to understand new markets. So the EV supply chain is evolving. And so we have to understand new players, new products, new players throughout the supply chain, and even potentially produce new products in order to meet some of the evolving demands for EVs. We also have to make a lot of choices around where and how we participate in the market. Certainly, there's going to be more demand than any one producer can handle. So it's very important that we understand what makes sense for us. And while this market represents just a fraction of the total nickel demand today, that growth is exponential. It's growing so fast. So demand for EVs is expected to grow 40% a year through 2030, as opposed to 2 to 4% in stainless in some of our traditional class 1 markets. Consequently, we also have to create plans that may be short term, maybe medium term, maybe long term, right? Very different plans for each to determine how we participate today and into the future, which might look very different than it does today. And I think one of the real positives for Vale in this market potential is the alignment with our ESG goals and our push for these zero emissions by 2050. There's so many synergies between electrification, carbon reduction, and ESG initiatives. So it's kind of exciting when we can put all the pieces together and we can provide products to a market that also in turn helps us enable our own internal initiatives and targets.
Thanks, Nancy. Can you tell us about some recent changes that you've seen in the supply chain and how the sector can continue to meet the rising demand?
Yeah. So the market really went through a huge shock in 2020 with the pandemic and the the impacts on demand and even some supply impacts. Coupled with that, and I think we almost forgot that we were in the middle of some trade wars between China and the US, which was impacting many of our end uses. So at the very least, we've seen the market try to diversify its supply chain, reducing dependence on one region or one country. Certainly, if we all ran out of toilet paper and all sorts of things, we know how sensitive supply chains can be now. And I think as consumers, we really feel that firsthand. So if a big company feels that, there's a supply chain risk, they're looking to really diversify that supply chain, put it in different countries, and in some cases completely regionalize it, so duplicating it from space to space. So it's particularly true, I think, in the EV space, maybe more driven by the complexity of that supply chain, since there's so many players along that supply chain. Definitely a short shelf life of most of the battery material chemicals, so that plays into it a little bit too. And nickel sulfate and lithium hydroxide both don't store well for long terms. It's just really more efficient for most companies and more effective to put localized supply chains and localized production. So as battery production moves closer to the automakers, which they're requiring, we also see the cathode makers follow, and then followed by the battery chemicals. So I think in order for us to grow in this space, and really this, I think it applies to every producer out there, there's really like three things that have to be addressed. One is this investment in developing sustainable, carbon-friendly mine supply and chemical production. So supply chains today just aren't set up for that. They're going to need a definite growth in investment and financing in order to bring economically viable deposits to the market. A second part of that is that we have to create innovative solutions and products. So it's probably not good enough just to take the existing products and say that's good enough for the next 20 years. But we have to find products that help reduce cost, help meet standards, help us reduce emissions and carbon footprints. And that also includes building solutions for capturing and recycling spent batteries. This ecosystem is really in its infancy today, and it needs to be ready when today's EV batteries start to come back into the market and are ready to be recycled. And the final thing that's really required for growth is this one of kind of these long-term views and long-term relationships. So as an industry, we have to be able to ensure consumers that the supply is going to be there to support growth, not 5 years from now, but 20 years from now or 30 years from now. So it means we have to do and create more long-term relationships where both parties are mutually invested in the same kind of long-term goals. And I think that will help support investment and then help ensure that the supply is going to be there when it's needed.
Great. Thank you so much,